Welcome to the Wombs of the World podcast, where we explore how culture is dynamic and birth is universal. This is a space for remembering, for reimagining, and for reclaiming birth as a sacred thread that connects us all. On our podcast today, we have the beautiful and brilliant Rosa Amarilla, a doula, herbalist, and land and water protector, rooted in the Andean traditions of her Venezuelan lineage. She weaves plant medicine, ceremony, and birthwork with a decolonizing framework, reminding us that birth is not only personal, but profoundly relational, deeply connected to the healing of our communities and of the earth. Rosa Maria, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yay! Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be chatting with you and having to spend this time together is also so beautiful. I feel like we're
So
both
beautiful.
in so many things all the time. So just sitting here with you and just deepening our knowledge that we both have to share with each other is really special. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. There are so many questions I have for you, and I can't wait for you to share some of your wisdom with our listeners. So, just to dive in, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the ceremony of birthwork. You often describe birth as ceremony, not just for the parents, but for the whole community. For birth workers listening, what does it mean to hold birth as ceremony, and how can doulas begin to weave elements of ceremony into their practice, even in small and respectful ways?
Yeah, I really love talking about this. I'm glad you asked. Well, I can begin kind of sharing a story about how the ceremony of birth in Latin America, like from a South American perspective, but also this wisdom is shared all across like Mesoamerica as well, which is really beautiful because all of this ancestral knowledge ties us together in big ways. And from my own family, and as well as other communities that I've been embedded within for a really long time, when someone is born, it's not just like an individual family that gets to experience that birth. It's like very rooted in the wider community. And one example of that is kind of like when the baby is given its name after it's born, there's like all of the village or all of the community is invited to witness that baby being named. And the name also doesn't necessarily come from the parents. It will maybe be coming from like an elder who has been chosen by the family to dream up that baby's name. So an elder will be contacted way before, like when that family is just becoming pregnant, or even if they're like dreaming about becoming pregnant, they'll also be accompanied like by an elder in their community. And then that elder will dream up with intention, place intentions to connect with the spirit of that baby. And then when that baby's born, it's not named right away. It's like through observation of that baby's essence, their spirit. I think it's 9 days that the elder will wait. And then there's like a name giving ceremony in which the parents don't even know the name yet. So the elder will present the name to the parents, but also the community will be invited. And once the name is given, like the young children would have baskets with like fruits and different offerings, and they'll go around like the rest of the community, like screaming out that baby's name. So it's like that vibration of the name, which is like a seed of the essence of that spirit, will just be like presented to its territory. And I think that's really beautiful. Like I think that practice has also been really erased in a lot of our communities to like present ourselves to the land that we belong to, not only just to like our extended community members, but also to the territory that we were birthed within, to our extended family there as well, all the relatives, not just human beings, all of the plants, all of the animals, the waters, that they also know like we're coming to this land, we're part of the family now. And I think that that's one small ritual that is practiced in some smaller indigenous communities that I've been a part of and I witnessed. But it's like slowly beginning to be lost, with like the integration of a lot of evangelical religion, especially in South America and things like that. A lot of these traditions have been forgotten. And like a lot of the names that you see now are more like Christian names or Catholic names or yeah. So that's a little bit of something that we have to begin reclaiming, like that aspect of the importance of naming the new spirits that are coming earthside to the land as well, so that they know that they're in relationship with that land. And I think that creates like an anchoring to place that a lot of us are missing. I also feel like so many ceremonies around caring for the placenta or caring for even the mothers before when they're still pregnant, to honor like that portal that they're crossing, and really like bring them into a space of understanding that they're now going to be different. You know, a part of them will be dying. They'll be reborn as a mother, as a matriarch. That's also seen a lot in cosmologies where the medicine wheel is used, like in the
Uh-huh.
Western direction from the Andean perspective. And this changes like depending on which indigenous nation you are coming from and speaking from, because all the directions are honored in different ways. But in the West, there's like the cave energy, and the moon is represented in this direction, and the water, and that also means that women who birth are also like the kind of caretakers of the Western direction. So when we're like calling in the West, we're also like calling in all those mothers who are now matriarchs and knowledge keepers. And what I learned is also in Mexico, where I'm living now, like they also share the same kind of way of honoring women in the Western direction, which is so special because in like ancient codices and things like that, the women after they gave birth were represented as sitting on a throne and with like the pelt of a jaguar on their backs. And that jaguar pelt was like an honor that was given to warriors, because when you birth, you're considered a warrior because you've like given your life in service of life. And so I think that that's really special to acknowledge that as well.
Oh my gosh, the mother as the warrior. I
Mhm.
love that. That is so beautiful. So I feel as though so many humans around the world are so disconnected from ancestral land. Like we've moved around so much as beings, we're so spread out. Do you have any words of wisdom for I just want to say, like, for people that are saying, like, having a hospital birth, that are far from generational land, that are disconnected from land, how to weave in nature elements and earth elements
Hmm.
to, I want to say, like a medicalized birth experience.
Yeah. So I think it depends. Like if you're able to get your placenta, I think is one step. But I know a lot of hospitals don't allow like the families to take their placenta. But from all of the communities that I've been so honored to be a part of in Northern Turtle Island, so Canada, as well as in South America and Central America, there's different practices around honoring the placenta as a way of anchoring you to territory. So, for example, if you're able to get your placenta, and even if you're not in the lands like where your ancestors are from or your family is from, you've immigrated somewhere else, for your child to be embedded within that land that they're being birthed within, having their placenta buried there is considered like a direct, like that umbilical cord connect to the land afterwards. You know, whereas before it was connected to mom and baby, now it's connected permanently to the land. And so that will give that child like a deeper sense of belonging, which I
Hmm.
think sometimes we're missing. You know, like we're so displaced through different layers of colonization and, you know, war and different things that go on, climate change. And so many people have different experiences where they don't necessarily have those ancestral lands really close to them to be able to do ceremony there and call upon those spirits there. But we can do this and connect in deep ways to any land that we're like moving through. And so I think that one practice, if you have a hospital birth, but you can ask for your placenta, you can still create ceremony around that to make sure that like that baby that is being welcomed is also feeling tied to that land. And so having that remembrance of responsibility to steward those lands that we're birthed within or that we move to is really important.
Mm. Well, that ties into just a much bigger conversation about land stewardship and honoring the mother, like the birthing mother and Mother Earth. But we can maybe save that tangent for another podcast with you because I know you have so much to say. But I wanted to touch on what you just said of due to colonization, we've been so separated from land and from our
Mhm.
own innate powers in so many ways. Your framework is deeply rooted in decolonization, questioning dominant Western approaches to health and remembering birth as relational, connected to land and the water and the plants and the ancestors. So I have kind of a two-part question for you. First of all, for our listeners, what does decolonization mean? Like just
Mhm.
groundwork, because I think that we often get carried away
Mhm.
knowing our own definitions, but to someone listening for the first time and we talk about that, like what does that concept mean to decolonize, period, and then to decolonize birth, and how can birth workers begin to decolonize their own practice?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a big question. I think it's true. It became the word decolonization kind of became this like trendy word that was thrown into mostly like, diversity, equity, and inclusion movements, things like this. Very without depth. I think a lot of the meaning was lost of what this word actually meant. And I think it could mean many things. Like decolonization could mean like land back. So returning stolen lands to the original stewards of those territories. And it could also mean like re-indigenizing the ways that we are moving through the land and being in relationship with each other. And I think you see this like embedded in so many different ways within our societies, like even in the ways that we are accountable to each other. And I think it's because we've been taught through such a punitive lens, and it goes into parenting as well. So decolonization, like this weaves through all the aspects of our life, like since we're born until we become elders and then return our bodies to the land. The ways in which we're taught in this like more colonized society to relate to each other, especially when there's like conflict or harm, is through shame and punishment. And I think like when we're thinking of parenting as well and raising the next generations, part of decolonizing also includes like reimagining or rethink ways that we are actually teaching our kids from either a punitive lens or a shame-based lens, and like, shedding all those things, because I think working from shame and punishment is actually just creating more fear in the next generations. And like a lack of accountability also creates humans that don't feel like they're responsible to each other. It creates like a culture where we're disposable. So it like replicates a lot of capitalist culture, which is the disposability of humans. Because when we don't believe that we belong to each other and we're responsible even for those members of society that are causing harm, we also belong to them and they belong to us. So it creates a sense of kinship that we've been really separated from as well. We believe that it's like, oh, if that person doesn't share my same politics or my same views about life, I don't have to engage with them. I can just engage with my closest circle, and that makes me feel safe. But what do we do with all of humanity who are maybe like coming from a place of trauma or ongoing intergenerational oppression, and so are acting from a place maybe sometimes of violence and harm? We're also responsible for those kin. And I think that that's what decolonization also means. It's like returning to this idea that we're all a family and we're all here to tend to each other and each other's flourishing and well-being and create worlds rooted in love and dignity for all, and that we're not disposable people. And so I think that that's one big piece around decolonization that we can integrate in like so many different aspects. But I think in parenting is really important because those folks are raising the next generations, and that's a really important role. And I think one thing here about the medicine wheel, I love talking about the medicine wheel because it honestly just the knowledge just in that wheel is so expansive, and it speaks to like the different stages that we go through in life. In the east is where life begins. So there's like the seed of creation, which is the fire. And in that seed of creation, all of humanity begins, but we also are in an ongoing cycle. So it doesn't just end when we reach the end of the medicine wheel. It doesn't mean that we just die. We actually continue circling this medicine wheel throughout our lives as we're like dying, shedding aspects of ourselves that are, no longer serving us and being reborn again. And when the East is present and the new life comes through in birth, that's a time when it's considered like folks are really connected to the land still because they're not yet socialized into this world in which we've been really kind of influenced by capitalism. So those children that come through are also elders because they are remembering, times before. They're maybe having many lives already that came before this one, and they have a lot of wisdom that they can share with the adults as well. So children are also elders. And then when they move through to the South, they're now like teenagers. And those teenagers are now like a big part of the community. So they now understand their essence, their role, their gifts, because they've been witnessed by their community as they're growing. When they reach the southern direction, now they're, honored as people who can take on big roles and responsibilities in their community. And they might even be giving a different name. So the name that they were given by elders in their birth, maybe will be different now that they're adolescents. They have more idea of who they are as individuals, so they might actually be honored with a different name that will be more aligned with who they are then, because it acknowledges that we're not stagnant beings. We're dynamic. We're always shifting. We're ever transforming all the time. And then when you become parents, when you're in the Western direction, it's kind of when you're more adults, when the community is like, okay, if you want to become parents, that's an option. And this is the place in which you're going to gather the wisdom that you need to actually bring the next generations into this realm. So you have to be prepared. It's not just something that you do without intention. It's like a very
Hmm.
intentional process that is accompanied by all the knowledge holders in your community as well, so that you know you're integrating and embodying the values of your community, and so that you're trusted to give life because you will tend to that life in a good way that will also then honor the values and intentions of that community as well.
Hmm. You've spoken about how reconnecting with ancestral practices is not only a form of resistance, but also a path of intergenerational healing.
Mm.
How how do you see birth workers participating in this healing, both within families and within the wider community?
Yeah, I feel, I mean, I can speak to it from my own experience. Like when I was 18, I think maybe even younger. I was in my first or second year of university. My family, well, my mom, my sister, and I had migrated to Northern Turtle Island, so to Canada, because of so much political instability and violence that was going on in my country, in Venezuela. And I started asking my mom because I was worried. I was like, well, if I'm no longer able to go and visit my grandmother in the mountains, or my aunts or my cousins who all lived a very like rural life in the mountain, and I felt like a big worry. Like, what am I gonna do if I can't like go and access my teachings? And I felt a lot of grief around that. And so I started interviewing my mom. Basically, I was like, I need to know all of the things of our family because I'm in this new territory. And so how will I keep like these teachings alive? And I began asking her, like, what are the rituals that we have about honoring our bodies, the women's bodies? And then she started talking about birth, and she had never told me any of these things. I was like, "Why didn't you tell me these things? Why did you not think it was important?" So she started telling me about the ceremony of the postpartum, which is called the cuarentena in many indigenous Latin American traditions. But we could also call it the cuarentena. And she was like, yeah, telling me all these things. I'm like, Mom, this is the magic. What do you mean that women are honored like this for 40 days? They don't have to do any work in the land because, you know, all our family are kind of campesinos. So they're working the land all the time. The women work really hard. They're harvesting the corn, they're planting, you know, the beans, everything. And it's a lot of work. So she's like, yeah, you get to rest for 40 days and all the women in the community come and do all your chores for you. They make you food. They give you massages. You don't have to get up from bed. You're just there connecting with your baby, like really nesting in family, and everything is taken care of for you. And then also talking about like hot and cold states of the body and things like that. So she was talking more deeply about like plant medicines and how we care for the women in the postpartum period. But I think that just through asking those questions for her was like, wow, I didn't think this was important because, you know, her mother and her great grandmother used to attend births, but then a lot of this shifted when the government criminalized traditional midwifery in many parts of the Andes Mountains. I think most parts of South America, it was criminalized, and so in her community as well. And so before, her mother and her great grandmother would just do home births and accompany other women birthing in the community as well. It was just so organic. You know, they weren't even necessarily having to differentiate between who was a midwife and who was not. All the women accompanied each other, and they like who had birth. When you gave birth, it was considered that you also had the knowledge to accompany other births because you had lived through it. So it was more informal. It wasn't like you just learned because since you were a child, you were attending births. You know, my mom would go with her great grandmother. She would be bringing the wood, warming up water, making medicinal teas, making soups as a child, you know? So it was like children were always involved in the birthing process as well. It wasn't so separate. And the whole family would come and help out if they could. But just through asking those questions to her was like, oh wow, I didn't realize how important it was to keep this knowledge alive, you know, for the next generations. I just assumed that because we were in a new place and maybe living in not a city, it was a small town, but, you know, distance and displaced from the ways of practicing those teachings. So I think just that was really healing for her because I think for her it was like, oh, I've left my land. And also I was told that all this knowledge was backwards from the state, you know, the government just basically told all those people that it was like, you only do these practices if you're poor. If you want to be more civilized or more modern, you would birth in clinics. Um, and that was the way, the community was slowly moving towards normalizing birthing in clinics. Just like, in my mother's generation, it wasn't that long ago that people were just birthing at home all the time, and it was the norm. There wasn't anything like particularly special about it or revolutionary about it. It was just how people were doing the thing. So now it's become something revolutionary because it's now a form of resistance, against the state criminalizing home birth and the work of midwives there as well. Um, and I think that now me pursuing this path as well has been a big healing for my family. Even my aunts now are like, wow, oh my God, they get so excited. Every time I just went back to Venezuela and I was able to go to my family's village in the mountain and spend time with my aunt, my mom's sister. And I was like, oh, let's go walk in the land and just tell me about all the plant medicines that you would use, to tend to wounds, to tend to birth, everything. And she was like, really? You want to do this? Because her daughters have left, they've been displaced as refugees, they've left. So she doesn't think like she has anyone to share this with. And if we are not asking our elders about these practices, where will they go? So it's also healing from them to know that their knowledge is important, it's valuable, it's sacred. And it's healing for them because they've had to keep this quiet for so long and they've had such shame around practicing these things a lot of the time, their fear because it's been criminalized. And through liberating that by asking questions and being interested and practicing and bringing like breathing life back into that, for them, it also feels like a big transformation, I think.
So, well, I have so many follow-up questions for you, but what I'm hearing as a really practical tool for birth workers is asking your own elders
Yeah.
questions about birth practices because you don't know what you might uncover, and to also echo what you said, like this this overt medicalization of birth is still fairly recent. Like it was
Yeah.
a generation or two back where exactly what you were describing, like witnessing birth was so normalized. And what you just said is literally, I was just talking to Kai, our facilitator in Tanzania, who recently met with the Hadza tribe. They're like one of the oldest nomadic tribes still left in the country. And that's literally how they describe their community. They're like, every woman here is a midwife. Like everyone
Mhm.
here because everyone attends birth. Like every woman in the community knows how to care for pregnant, birthing, and postpartum women because it is a community effort. And it's like, yes, and then I think about my day-to-day life, and I'm a birth worker, so I'm invited to births, obviously, but, like, I haven't seen a woman breastfeeding in public in so long. Just sharing that kind of wisdom and knowledge has been so robbed.
Yeah.
It's been so, so robbed. Um, I'm curious as to I love knowing that it's in your lineage to be a medicine woman and to be a midwife, and that you clearly had that awakening to ask your mom those questions. How will you just tell us a little bit more, the us behind me, the us, our listeners? Will you tell us a little bit more about your own personal journey? Because
Mhm.
you weave a lot of things together, and like you literally weave, like you are a traditional artisan.
Mhm.
Would you tell us a little bit about the different paths of your life and how you heard the call?
Mhm. Wow. Oh my gosh. I feel like that's a long story, but I'll try to summarize a little bit. Um, it sounds a little bit funny. I feel like sometimes when I tell this story, it sounds very woo woo. And I feel like,
Embrace the woo woo. Embrace.
yeah, sometimes I'm like a little bit conscious of that, but I'm like, well, that's just the truth. That's just how it was. And it's not to romanticize any of it because I think there's also a lot of grief and loss connected to, um, decolonizing, and like unraveling and kind of digging through all of the violence and trauma that exists in our community to reach like the beauty and the medicine. So there's like a lot of work that is not just like, oh, so spiritual and so ceremonial all the time. There's like a lot of grief work. There's a lot of trauma healing. There's a lot of um, forgiveness that needs to happen as well to like be coming to a place where you can actually celebrate the teachings of your community through all of and see people in their whole selves, not just as romanticized, knowledge holders, but people who are complex, who have lived many different forms of violence. And so, yeah, that's part of the work of of unraveling that. But I began, I think, kind of when I was 16, maybe, but younger, even younger. I think when I was a child, I had a lot of dreams. Like I work a lot with dreams now, but when I was a child, I started dreaming of animals that would come to me in my dreams and speak to me and tell me things. And my mom would just be like, "Oh, those are nightmares." She would tell me those are nightmares, and I was like, "No, no, but they're not. Like they're telling me really cool things." And I feel like it's important to hear them. And I was just like, then stop telling her that I was dreaming about them because I felt a little bit like she didn't understand. But then one time when I was 16, I had this very particular dream that I think shaped me a lot, which was that a woman, I was like laying on the ground and there was this woman who had her head wrapped in kind of a turban. She was very dark skinned and she was wearing like a really long tunic, long sleeve tunic. And I was laying on the ground and she had surrounded me with fire. There was like a circle of fire around me and I was in the center of the circle. And she had many plants that she was working with and I didn't know what they were because at this point we had already immigrated to Canada. I was living in like such a remote town there as well in the north and so disconnected from like any Latin American tradition. There was like no, like all of the folks who were not indigenous were obviously immigrants, but they did not identify as immigrants any longer. So I was like the most recent immigrant. So it was a very strange time of my life. I felt really disconnected. And so having this dream where this woman was like whispering things to me in a language that in the dream I understood, but in waking life, I wasn't sure what she was saying. But in the dream, I knew exactly what she was saying. And she was whispering things in my ear. She would come to one and breathe like tobacco. She was like cleansing me with tobacco in the dream and blowing on one side. And then she would go to the other and be whispering in both ears. And this lasted a really long time. And I remember I was just like, is this woman safe? Like I was a little bit afraid of her. I didn't understand if she was a safe person, who she was, but I felt she was my relative. And then after she put her sleeve like towards my face and out of the sleeve of her, she was wearing like a tunic. Out of the sleeve came a really giant snake out of her sleeve and towards my mouth. So she put her hand by my mouth so that the snake would kind of go into my mouth. And I was so afraid. I remember I was like clenching my jaw so hard and I woke up with like pain all across my jaw because I was like, no. And I screamed no. And I woke up and I was like, I need to call my mom. It was super late.
Mhm.
And I called her. It was like 4 a.m. So I was just like, oh, maybe she won't answer. And then she answered and she was scared because she was like, why are you calling me at 4 a.m.? Like, this is terrifying. So I called her and I told her, I was like, Mom, I just really need to tell you this dream because I felt like I just dreamed about maybe your grandmother. Or not her grandmother, but her great grandmother, because I met my own great grandmother. And she said, and I told her the whole dream. And then she was like, yeah, I think you did because you're, and I was like, oh, finally. Okay. Finally, you're not just telling me that I'm having nightmares. She was like, you know what? Her great grandmother, whose name is Rosenda, she was a medicine woman as well, but she specifically worked with snake medicine. And so she started telling me all this journey about snake medicine in the family. And I was like, okay, so what's going on? Why don't you just like freely tell me these things that I have to have these like big transformative moments for you to actually like release information? So then she told me all the story of placenta, and I was like, oh wow. So this woman came to visit me and she must have had like something to tell me. And I was afraid. So I felt a little bit afraid because she felt very powerful. And I was like, I don't know if she's wanting to harm me or if she's actually trying to tell me something that's really important. And then from there, I think something changed within me. Something opened up. I was very curious. I started asking a lot of questions about the medicine, specifically about tobacco and how it was used in my family for healing. And my mom just like opened up, like just like spilled out everything she had been keeping, I think, because she didn't think it was important to share, shared so much. And I was like, okay, I'm going to pursue the path of learning about plant medicines, of learning about my territory. I went and moved to an Indigenous reserve in the west coast of Canada, what is now known as British Columbia, but their territory is called Secwepemcúlecw. And I lived there for 2.5 years. I had beautiful, beautiful, beautiful elders who like welcomed me into their home, and I still like they're my family. Every time I'm there in that territory, I go and spend time with them. They have totally transformed me. I went there, I was super young. I think I was 20, and I was like, I just need to know things. I don't, my family's not here, but I know that there's like deeper knowledge than what we're being told. I know there's other truths here that we're not seeing. And I started being there. One of the elders in that community started teaching me how to do traditional beadwork. She taught me how to make medicines from the plants in their territory. We started doing hide work. So I learned how to tan a deer hide for the first time and made my first drum from deer hide for the first time. And I was just like, I'm staying here. This is where I belong. I'm just going to stay in this territory. And then I was like, after 2.5 years, I'm like, no, you know what? I have to return to my lands. I have to return to my territory. I have to return to my practices, and just dig deeper, because I see the beauty in how the folks in this nation, and Splatcheen specifically, have like maintained through so many levels and layers of colonization, have tried to maintain their knowledge and are sharing it so openly and so humbly. With me, who's not even from this territory, I need to return and to my family and remind them how important it is, so that we don't lose the sacredness of this knowledge. And so I went back to my mom again, but then also back to the Andes. And I was like, Mom, look at all the things I learned. And she's like, oh yeah, I did that as a child. And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I was like beading all the
Mom!
things. And she was like, I know how to bead. I used to bead with my grandmother all the time. We sold beadwork in the markets. I was like, cool. Okay. I was like, amazing. Thank you for telling me these things. But it was through dreamwork really that I started reconnecting to that calling of like, oh, my family, I come from a lineage of really strong medicine makers, healers, medicine women. My grandmother was a healer as well. She was a huestera, so she would like work with people's bones to heal bones and things like that. And my mom is a healer as well. And so I'm like, wow, I didn't realize, it was only when I met other people who were in their power, even though they've been very colonized as well, but who were actively reclaiming, practicing, sharing, teaching. I was like, oh, this is really important. I need to do this for my own community. And I started walking that path in deep ways. And I went back to the Andes and learned from so many different teachers there. Yeah, and that just began. It's an ongoing journey. I'm still in that path, but it began through that dream of the snake.
Wow. I'm so glad I asked you that question. That's that I just feel as though there's so many different ways that people are called into this work, and for you it's so it's so obvious. It's so generational for you, and yeah, whether that was your great great grandmother or a different ancestor from like a time even further back that came to visit you, that is so powerful. And so now in your work, first of all, I would love for you to tell our listeners slash viewers here where you currently are and what you're currently doing, because I feel like that ties into the whole story.
Yes. So as you mentioned, I'm a traditional artisan, so I work a lot with hides. And right now I'm in Norway because I'm here to learn from a woman who is really reclaiming the traditional land-based practices of her own lineage for many, many years. She's super well known within communities who are actively trying to like reclaim traditional land-based practices. And she works specifically with a moose because they're part of the territory that she's part of. Moose is a really sacred animal there. So I'm going to dive into like 10 days land-based studies in the bush, where we'll be working with moose hunters, traditional hide tanners, folks who like really have held on to a lot of knowledge of how to honor life. If you're actually going to be consuming animals or anything, not even just animals, like any plant, anything that we consume is a life that we're also asking for permission to take. And so deepening the knowledge of how to honor all the creatures and beings that we're actually putting into our bodies as nourishment that are giving us life is really important to me. And it's interesting because when I went to the indigenous nation that I was speaking to earlier, to Splatcheen, had been vegan for like 17 years. And I went to like a fully hunting nation. And I was like, oh, wow. So of course, this is like so different. This is so much more aligned because people are actually in relationship. And when you're in
Mhm.
relationship with all those beings, you're giving offerings, you have songs that, specifically for hunting and for those specific animals. You have, oral histories and stories that come from the teachings of those animals that they give to each nation. And I feel like through capitalism and like the industrial farming, we're so separated from
Mhm.
our food systems. And so a big part of the reason why I'm here is to also just continue to building the skills so I can also share in whatever capacity that I can with others in my community. You know, my family is also a hunting gathering community. Most of their food when they were small, including my mom, was like foraged foods, and also hunted foods like different birds and fish from the rivers and things like that. But because then we moved into a city, like I wasn't able to practice those things. And now I'm like fully in different kind of mode. It's really funny for my mom's like, wow, you're like returning to the life that I had as a child that I thought I was escaping from to give you a better life. And you're just going backwards. I'm like, no, this is the good life. This is the good life. You know, it's like being in relationship feels life giving. It feels like when you actually are communing with that animal or that plant or that mushroom, like you know them. You've sang to them, you've given them offering, you asked for permission. And so it feels really different to actually like there's like a level of gratitude for that life that I feel like sometimes is not present when we're not so connected to the things that we're consuming, especially all the labor. Like to actually tan a hide is so much work. Oh my gosh, it's so much work. So you have a deeper level of appreciation for all life because you're part of the process. You're part of that web of existence. And I think that changes the ways in which we consume and the ways in which we move in the world. And that also includes birth. When the community is like so deeply embedded in the process, you understand the need to take care of the birthing people. You understand how important that role is to bring life into the next generations. And so it is honored as something that's sacred. But when we're disconnected from that, we see it as like, oh, it's so, you know, medicalized, it's so invisibilized. You're in a room in a hospital, no one sees what's going on, no one sees the journey of that mom also afterwards or that
Yeah.
family in their postpartum. But when you're witnessing, you understand like, oh, this is a delicate time for this family. This time needs to be sacred, protected, cared for in deep ways. It's life changing, I think.
I mean, I absolutely agree. I'm curious as to what kind of words of wisdom you have about reconciliation, because
Mhm.
not everyone in the world is able to, let's say, like move into returning to a more off-grid living, right? Like
Yeah.
there's the majority of the world now is like living in cities and is so disconnected from land but that doesn't mean that there isn't so much intention that can be put into day-to-day life and ritual that can be put into day-to-day life to honor the process. I mean, we obviously deep dive talking about birth and like honoring birth, but what I love about your work and your perspective is that it's like birth is weaved into a much bigger narrative. And so I'm just curious, what kind of wisdom can you
Mm.
share or advice can you share? How can we be incorporating more of this into our day-to-day lives to reconnect
Mhm.
and reclaim and honor and heal in the process?
Yeah, I know. It's such a beautiful question because I do think like there's so many of us who are searching for something. And I think that's why some folks sometimes feel a little lost and a little maybe I felt sad in the city because I felt like I didn't have the tools there that I needed. But then I found that you can have those tools anywhere. It's not externalness. It's not an external thing. So even if you're in a city, you can build an altar. I think that was one of the first things that I did when I was living in a little. It was a small city. I've never lived in a big city, but it was a small city, and I still felt like folks were kind of doing their own thing. It was very individualistic. Um, and I just created a giant altar. I put all my ancestors there. I put candles. I put my plant medicines that I feel I'm called to. So even if you live in a small apartment and you have just like a little sacred space for yourself that you can create in a corner, you know, beside your bed, wherever you can find a little space that is just for you to feel more connected. You can light a candle and set intentions for your dreams. You can light a candle when you're feeling like you need guidance from like, you know, your grandparents that might not be there anymore, your parents who might have passed, or great grandparents, who knows. Any member of your family who you feel like, oh, it would be great to hear some wisdom from you now, or I'm remembering you with like so much love, but I don't have a place to honor you. Just like create altars in your home wherever you can. I think is one simple thing that we can do, even if we're in an apartment.
Totally.
Just create
Hmm.
sacredness wherever we are in moments of gratitude. Um, because I think that when we have those spaces for gratitude and for prayer, in whatever way that looks like for you, prayer can be very different, you know?
Hmm.
It grounds us to ourselves. And I think when we're connected to ourselves and to our spirit, we can show up in better ways in relationship to others because we understand our shadows as well as all the beauty that we might be able to bring. And I think even that self-practice that doesn't require you to have any tools other than yourself as a
Mm-hmm.
tool, to actually just begin to investigate and explore yourself. Like, what are all the
Mm-hmm.
things that I was taught that I actually don't think are aligned with my spirit, that I was just taught, but I don't think I believe in them. To start exploring that self-investigation, to start shedding like shame-based patterns, judgment, any kind of resentment that we're holding. And I think like when we do that self-work, I think it's important for all birth workers to come to a place of understanding all of our wounds so we can actually work to transform those and not replicate those when we're accompanying other families. We're in relationship out in the world with anyone who we might come into contact with. But I think that that's the path also of healers. I think to be a healer, there has to be integrity. And I think a lot of times, especially in Latin America and in Mexico, there's like a trend of being a healer and of being people like denominate. I don't know if that's a word. Call themselves shaman. And I'm often very worried about that because to actually be like a shaman in my community, there were shamans, and those people have been observed and witnessed by their community for many years, have been learning from elders for many years to actually be like honored with that title. And I think it's the same for birth workers. There has to be a lot of integrity in our work. And that
Mm-hmm.
includes actually like looking at ourselves, looking deeply at ourselves. And that's part of the sacred work of decolonization. And no matter where we are, we can begin to decolonize our spirits, our minds, regardless of whether we can have like a garden outside or whatever. Our garden is also internal. And we have to look at the things that need like some love and tending to that earth that has been maybe like a little dry and we need to water it, or ideas about ourselves that are maybe really judgmental or not loving. There
Mm-hmm.
has to be attending to our internal ecosystem so that when we do this work, we can do it from a place of groundedness, a place of like truth and honesty and deep care and deep love that is not creating more traumas for the next generations as well. And regardless of where we are, I think that's a beautiful practice to engage in for sure.
Mm-hmm. You referred to yourself as an accountability facilitator. Will you
Yes.
ex will you and I think that that's so cool and beautiful. Will you explain what that means? Because I feel like that really relates to everything you're saying here. But so, like, what is an accountability facilitator, and how can we hold ourselves accountable?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because every time I do this kind of work where I support like individuals or organizations or small communities to like reconnect with processes of engaging in conflict and harm repair from a place of like love and transformative justice, and ancestral teachings as well that go beyond any of these like modern names like restorative justice and things like that are very modern names for like indigenous practices of like responding to harm and keeping balance in community. um, and I think that I'm also in the process of becoming more accountable. So what I think the greatest teachers that I've ever had are folks who are like so humble enough to say like, I'm also learning, like I'm also messing up all the time. I'm not always the best at accountability. I'm not always showing up in the best ways when there's conflict. I mess up constantly. And through those things that we notice, those patterns that we notice that we want to unlearn and do better and transform, that's the places where we can teach from, because we can only teach from our own lived experiences and the things that we have moved through. And I think
Mhm.
that yes, I'm an accountability facilitator, and I'm also like one of these people learning, as I go. And I think what that means is like remembrance. I think a lot of it is just remembering who we are, because I find that a lot of harm that happens within communities, within healing spaces. I like to speak to a lot of healing spaces as well, because there's this like phenomenon of like healers taking a place of power within a community and a place of being kind of worshipped in some ways, like put on a pedestal. But those folks are also, human beings. We're just human beings who are also really messy and who have all been colonized. And so we're still unlearning and learning our own wounds and unlearning a lot of those behaviors so that we can show up to heal and support communities in more aligned ways and more coherent ways. And so sometimes I feel like the process looks like bringing folks who have had a lot of violence in their community into a place of empathy and compassion to see each other and all the wounds that we have been collecting as a community, as a society, and just like responding from love. Because I don't think we need more cancel culture. There's no need for more violence as a response to violence. It's really not creating the transformation that I think we need for the next generation. I think it's like love is always the medicine, and it sounds really cheesy sometimes, but it's like it's so true. When you see that
It is
someone
so
is
true.
responding to harm from a really angry place or detached place or lack of accountability is like, let's call that person in and see like which wounds are making them feel unsafe to show up in this conflict in a good way. Like what actually has shaped your response to this conflict, and what safety can we create as a community so that you actually feel like, you know, when you cause harm, it doesn't mean that you will be exiled. It doesn't mean that you will no longer belong to community. And part of it, I think I spoke to in the beginning, is like returning to kinship. And those are ancestral ways, because when you actually belong to a community, you understood that every single member is valuable and important and not disposable. And so if someone does something that's not in alignment with the community, we'll have a circle. You know, we'll have a restorative justice circle where the folks who experience the harm will be able to name the harm to that person. And that person can then also like, you know, be seen with compassion as someone who
Mhm.
has messed up, but they're also able to transform. So holding on to like the humanity of that person and acknowledging that there is hope for that person to actually do better. Because as we were talking about the medicine wheel, we're constantly shedding and dying and being reborn. And when we understand that we're not like stagnant beings, that just because we do something that's harmful or we mess up, it does not therefore mean that we're bad people, and that that is like now our identity. It's just like something that happened along our cyclical journey of walking in that medicine wheel. And we can
Mhm.
also release that and do better and change and transform and be given a new name when we're seen by our community that we have actually taken accountability. We've shown up in different ways. We're embodying those things that we're speaking. And so therefore we're no longer the same. And that's why a new name comes. So it all ties together. All these things that I'm saying that sound kind of sporadic, I feel like actually all kind of tie together with accountability. It's all kind of accountability, because I think that's one of the biggest teachings. It's one of the biggest indigenous teachings, is being accountable to each other, being accountable to the land, being accountable to all of the creatures that we're constantly in relationship with. And through those teachings, we can actually do the work of being healers, of being birth workers, of bringing new life into the world and holding that space with care, because it's a big responsibility.
It's a huge responsibility, and I do feel like it all ties in together, and even in listen like, at one point in the conversation, you're like, "I don't wanna be too woo-woo," but even that, you know, like, that is a colonial mindset that you can't fully express and, like,
Yeah,
live truth because it's been assigned, or it's, you know, been put into a box, and
yeah,
I completely agree with you that I feel like we're so polarized these days. There's so much division, and it's like if you don't check all these boxes, then you don't
yeah,
belong, then you're, like, on this side or you're on this side, and what we need to come back to is the circle and
yeah,
not, like, the boxes along this spectrum, and I think that, like, for me, when I think about what does decolonization mean, it means, like, finding that circle again and finding that, like, there is no, like, hierarchy of knowledge, like, there is so much that we can learn from each other and so much that the land can teach us, and it's just, you know, it's like we've poured cement over everything,
yeah,
like, generations and generations where we've just become so disconnected, and the land really has all of the answers. The earth has all of the answers, and I know you know that, and that's the work that you're doing every day, all day. Um, so for those who don't know, Rosa Amarilla is one of our trip facilitators on Wombs of the World trips. So you can come and learn from her by joining us in Mexico
yeah.
or in Ecuador potentially. But you also have your own offerings. Would you share with us what you have in the works and how people can find you, get in touch with you, learn from you?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I have a lot of things in the works. But some of the things that I feel like are more like workshopy, I'll speak to after. But first I have um, brewing up this kind of accompaniment for folks who are in their postpartum period, as well as in their perimenopause, or pleno pausa in Spanish. It's like a different word that I like more. But it's like a place of being full, not a place of lacking, that is kind of understood in the menopause. But it's through an accompaniment with plant medicines and with mushroom medicines, and also with like kind of like prompts, because mushrooms I feel like sometimes work differently in the body. And so it's nice to have like accompaniment. So for folks who don't know, I also have alongside my partner a project that's called Mama Funga, where we grow medicinal mushrooms in Chiapas, Mexico. We work a lot with women who have come to us for different things. Like some folks have endometriosis, some folks have like cysts in their ovaries, whatever they might be facing, or they're like going through menopause and are experiencing like a lot of different changes in their body, and they want to explore the medicine of mushrooms. And we grow those mushrooms, so we have like a really deep relationship with them. We like give them loving messages when we're growing them. There's like a very intentional process of how this medicine is being made, and we offer those to a lot of people with wombs. And I think that that's just came organically. Like we weren't even necessarily thinking that that would be the case. And then all these women started coming, being like, "Well, I have all these things, and my menstruation is all messed up. Like, how do I reconnect with my cycles and cyclicity as a human?" And I was like, "Oh, the medicine of mushrooms reminds us of all of that interwovenness that we carry because of
Mhm.
the microbial networks that they're like creating all underneath us. And I feel like they're a beautiful medicine. So that's one of the things, weaving up some new dreams for accompanying women who are in their postpartum and in the menopause phase of their life through mushroom medicine. So stay tuned with Mama Funga for those offerings. And then also, as we were talking about accountability, I was working with a center for a really long time who supports survivors of gendered violence and sexual violence. And I created a sort of toolkit for therapists, but also for facilitators of community spaces, anyone, birth workers as well. It applies to anyone because I think this theme of accountability that we've been talking about today is really important. So it's a 3-part workshop series, which speaks to why some healing phases or healing practices or more like Western medical systems might not actually be safe spaces for folks who are coming from culturally rooted backgrounds, who are racialized, who are Black, who are Indigenous, why those spaces historically have been unsafe. We speak to a lot of different things around colonization of and criminalization of traditional healing practices and the invisibilization of Indigenous knowledge within healing spaces, specifically like clinical settings, hospitals, and so why when someone comes to us in a time of crisis or in a time of needing support, maybe through birth, maybe through other things that have happened in their life, um, those places might not actually be safe for us to refer them to. So we dive deep into that. There's 3 modules, so it's like slow paced, each module's 2 hours. We really build like a community. It's basically just also based for a space for folks to share their own experiences. It's yeah, really communally rooted, which I really like. And then we also talk about like tangible practices of how to integrate traditional healing from a respectful place, from a place of honoring that culture and not appropriating. So we speak to the difference between that and how we can begin actually tangibly integrating some more ancestral practices into the ways that we hold space, facilitate spaces, and also care for each other. And then we also, in these specific modules, take a look at how we define safety as communities so that we're not necessarily always defaulting to policing and policing behaviors like surveillance, punishment. And that also goes into the theme of accountability. When we've only been taught policing and punitive measures for responding to harm, how do we imagine different worlds where that's not actually the norm? And so we begin to talk about let's heal the things that we've been taught about when we actually do something that's harmful, and let's talk
Mhm.
about how policing behaviors like seep their way into all of our society, not just through policing, but
Yep.
in schooling and things like that for children. So we speak to a lot of the things that we were taught as children and how we want to shed those things for the next generation. So that's kind of the workshop series in a summary. And yeah, I'll be posting those and offering those now to a wider public. Before I was just working with therapists and counselors. But now I'm going to offer it to more communities. So stay tuned for that as well.
Amazing. Oh my goodness, you are such a beautiful being inside and out. Thank you so much for sharing such wisdom with us and such insight. And I'm gonna have to have you back on because I have so many more questions for you. But to wrap this up, I was wondering if you would like to set an intention or say a
Mm.
prayer for our listeners and for the birth workers of the world and for anybody that might be listening to this today.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, wow. There's so many things that I would love to pray for birth workers. So maybe we can say, may the work of birth workers and all those who protect that portal between life and death be protected, be remembered as sacred. Um, may all of us be kept safe in this uncertain time where birth work is being hyper criminalized as well. May we have remembrance in our communities of the important role that it is to be a birth worker, to tend to life and to tend to death as well. May that collective memory return to all of us. May the water, who holds all those pathways of memory, also cleanse us of all the things we want to shed and bring life to us again so that we can be in community in different ways, in more restorative ways, and more aligned ways. May the teachings of our ancestors move through us, move through our hands as we're supporting those women. May all of that wisdom that our ancestors hold come through our hands as we're caring for those new babies and bringing this next generation to life. Yeah, and may those new generations that are coming through always be protected as well. And may they carry that ancestral wisdom of how to tend to their territories, how to be in relationship with each other, how to be more loving, how to teach us to be more loving as well. May those teachers come through us. May we only birth beautiful teachers um, for the next generations who will just be the medicine that we all need. And may we also remember that we can be that medicine too. And we have so much power within us as birth workers to transform so many systems. So yes, prayer for the birth workers to come, the ones who have been already doing this work for generations, the ones who came before us, and for the new babies. So much love to us
Mm,
all.
thank you. Thank you so
Mhm.
much. It was a pleasure speaking with you. A takeaway that I have from our conversation is the practice of gratitude. And so I'm going to be holding you in my heart as I continue on my day and practicing gratitude in everything that I do.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Thank
having me. So
you.
lovely.
Thank you for being on the Wombs of the World podcast and exploring how culture is dynamic and birth is universal.
Yay! Love to all the birth workers out there.
Mwah, 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 mwah. We'll talk
Thank
soon.
you so much. Talk
Bye.
soon. Bye.